London has always been a city of contradictions. On one side, the skyline shimmers with glass towers, luxury penthouses, and the unending hum of expensive cars racing through Mayfair and Kensington. Beneath the neon glow, however, linger streets filled with shadows, smoke rising from worn-out factories, and the weary eyes of people who work until their bodies nearly collapse. It is a place where wealth and poverty breathe side by side, but never truly touch, two parallel worlds that pretend not to know each other's existence. Within this glittering maze, a boy named Cassian D'Arcy was born into a family that carried wealth like a crown. His childhood home was less a house and more a palace of marble, chandeliers, and silence, where every desire was fulfilled, except the ones of the heart. Cassian grew up surrounded by privilege. His father, an iron-willed businessman, built an empire that demanded heirs, not dreamers. His mother, elegant yet calculating, believed her son's future lay not in love but in alliances, marriages arranged with the daughters of other wealthy dynasties. From the outside, Cassian's life looked enviable: elite schools, private tutors, vacations in villas by the Mediterranean. But within him, loneliness bloomed like an invisible wound. He longed for something real, something untouched by the price tags that haunted every corner of his home. The polished silver and endless banquets could not silence the aching truth. He was drowning in a sea of abundance, yet starving for affection. Far from the glamour of London, in a modest neighborhood of Manchester, another life was unfolding. Elowen Hartfield was born into a world of hardship, her home a humble brick house where the paint peeled from the walls and the roof leaked when it rained. Her father labored in a factory, his hands rough and scarred, while her mother worked as a nurse, giving her strength to patience even when her own body trembled with exhaustion. Money was always scarce, sometimes too scarce for new clothes, often too scarce for luxuries that Cassian had never even thought twice about. Yet Elowen grew up surrounded by something far rarer than diamonds: love. Her parents taught her the dignity of kindness, the nobility of sacrifice, and the power of dreams that refused to die even when hunger knocked at the door. While Cassian's mornings began with the purr of luxury cars and the clipped footsteps of maids carrying trays of breakfast, Elowen's began with her mother's hurried voice, her father's weary smile, and her own frantic rush to catch the bus for school. Their lives could not have been more different. Cassian wore suits tailored in Paris. Elowen stitched old dresses to make them last another season. Cassian studied in grand lecture halls where professors quoted philosophers. Elowen read borrowed books late at night by the dim light of a flickering lamp. Yet in both of them, in their opposite worlds, there lingered a quiet yearning, for a connection that would not ask who they were, but simply see them as they truly were. Cassian often looked out the tall glass windows of his mansion and felt the city mocking him. He was taught to calculate profit, to suppress emotion, to wear his family name like armor. But behind the mask, he dreamed of walking streets where people laughed without pretension, where friendship was not measured by wealth. He wanted to meet someone who would not bow before his surname, who would not love him for his fortune but for the heart he kept hidden. In contrast, Elowen's world demanded strength. She learned early to swallow disappointment and fight for her dreams. Though poverty pressed against her every day, she carried within her a radiant belief that love and character mattered more than gold. She never envied the rich. Instead, she pitied those who lived without warmth, without sincerity. Two souls, born into two opposite worlds, one bound by chains of wealth, the other by the weight of poverty. They did not know each other yet, but the city already held their destinies like invisible threads, weaving toward a meeting neither could imagine. Fate was preparing its cruel, beautiful design. One day, their paths would collide, not in some fairy tale garden, but in the messy, unpredictable fabric of real life. And when it did, their love would rise against the world, bright, defiant, and ultimately tragic. For some stories are not written to end in happiness. They are written to remind us that love, in its purest form, can both heal and destroy. It was during the autumn semester at King's College in London that fate quietly stitched its first knot between them. Cassian had enrolled not out of passion, but out of expectation. His father had chosen the degree for him, economics and international relations, believing it would groom his son into the ruthless successor of the D'Arcy Empire. Cassian, however, found the lectures suffocating, the conversations with classmates shallow. His peers spoke the language of money, not of meaning. He attended the debates and seminars out of obligation, his mind often elsewhere, wandering toward dreams he dared not confess. Elowen had come to London on a scholarship, carrying with her nothing but a battered suitcase, 2 worn-out pairs of shoes, and a heart full of determination. She was studying literature and history, working part-time at a cafe near campus to cover what her scholarship could not. Every day was a balancing act, between lectures, late-night shifts, and the endless pressure of survival. Yet she loved the university library, the smell of old books, the quiet promise that knowledge could lift her above the gravity of poverty. In her mind, education was her bridge to freedom. And though she tried to remain invisible among the sea of privileged students, her spirit carried a glow she could not hide. Their first meeting was not dramatic, not the kind of moment stories often exaggerate.
It happened in the quay of the library on a rainy afternoon.
Cassian had come seeking escape from a business seminar he could not stand, while Elowen was buried in the works of Virginia Woolf, her brow furrowed in concentration. The seat across from her was empty, and Cassian, too weary to care about propriety, sat down. For a while, silence bound them together, the sound of raindrops against the window, the scratching of pens, the soft rustle of turning pages. It was only when Elowen dropped one of her notes, a small scrap of paper covered in hurried handwriting, that their eyes finally met. Cassian bent down to pick it up, and when he handed it back, Elowen noticed something unusual. His clothes screamed wealth, the tailored jacket, the silver watch, but his eyes carried a tiredness she recognized, a loneliness she had seen before in the patients her mother tended. Cassian, on the other hand, found himself unexpectedly unsettled by her gaze. It was not the gaze he was used to, the one that measured his worth in fortune. Elowen's eyes did not care for the D'Arcy name, they pierced through it, searching for the boy behind the armor. He had never felt so naked, so strangely seen, by anyone. From that day on, their paths seemed to cross more often. At first by accident, then by choice. Cassian found excuses to visit the library more frequently, always gravitating toward the quiet corner where Elowen studied. Sometimes they exchanged a nod, sometimes a smile. Eventually, small conversations bloomed between them, first about books, then about dreams. Elowen spoke with a passion that startled him. She wanted to write one day, to capture the stories of people who lived unseen in the shadows. Cassian, for reasons he could not explain, began to confess the truths he had never told anyone, that he felt trapped by his family's fortune, that he wished to live a life of meaning, not just wealth. It was a friendship built not on surface, but on depth. Elowen teased him about his arrogance when he slipped into it, and Cassian found her laughter more comforting than all the luxuries of his mansion. She admired his willingness to listen, his ability to be vulnerable when most men of his class were wrapped in pride. Slowly, attraction seeped into the cracks of their bond, unspoken yet undeniable. Cassian began to wait for her smile each day. Elowen began to notice the way his presence made the library warmer. Neither dared to name it, but both could feel it, the stirring of something powerful, something dangerous. Autumn turned to winter, and their bond only deepened. They walked together after lectures, sometimes under the drizzle of rain, sometimes through the fog-draped streets of London. Cassian bought her coffee once, but when Elowen protested that she could not repay him, he smiled and told her it was not charity, but a moment he wanted to share. In those evenings, Cassian forgot the weight of his family name, and Elowen forgot the heaviness of her financial burdens. For a few hours, they were simply two souls walking side by side, discovering each other's laughter, fears, and fragile hopes. Yet beneath this growing closeness lurked the shadow of their realities. Cassian's world was guarded by walls of gold, and Elowen's was burdened by chains of necessity. The deeper they stepped into each other's lives, the more certain it became, this was not going to be a simple story. Love was blooming, yes, but in a garden that society had already fenced with thorns. Love, once it begins to bloom, rarely stays hidden for long. Though Cassian and Elowen tried to keep their bond within the quiet corners of the library and the stolen moments of late-night walks, whispers began to spread. Their classmates noticed how the wealthy heir of the D'Arcy Empire was spending far too much time with the scholarship girl from Manchester. Some mocked in hushed voices, others watched with curiosity, but eventually the rumors reached the ears of Cassian's parents. The first confrontation came on a winter evening at the D'Arcy mansion. The long dining table was set with silverware gleaming under crystal chandeliers, but the atmosphere was cold, suffocating. Cassian's father leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp as knives. "I hear," he said with chilling calm, "that you've been seen with someone. A girl." His mother's lips curled, not in curiosity, but in disdain. "From the lower classes, no less. Cassian, surely this is beneath you." Their voices carried no interest in who Elowen truly was. To them, she was not a person, only a threat, a crack in the fortress of their social standing. Cassian, though nervous, did not flinch. For the first time in years, he found himself unwilling to bend to their authority. "Her name is Elowen," he said quietly but firmly. "And she is more than the labels you throw at her." His father's fist struck the table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "Enough. You will not throw away your future, our future, for some charity case. You will marry where you are told, as all D'Arcys have before you." His mother added with venom, "She wants your money, Cassian. That's all such people ever want." But Cassian knew with a certainty that shook him, that Elowen wanted nothing but the truth of his heart. Meanwhile, Elowen was fighting her own battles at home. When she finally gathered the courage to tell her parents about Cassian, the reaction was not the fairy tale she had hoped for. Her father, weary from the factory, looked at her with a mix of fear and sorrow. "Elowen, do you know what you're doing? A man like that does not belong to our world. He may love you now, but his family, his wealth, they will crush you." Her mother, though gentler, echoed the same worry. "Sweetheart, love is beautiful, but love does not pay the rent, does not feed a family. Be careful, my child. Be very careful." Elowen tried to explain that Cassian was different, that he cared for her beyond wealth, but her words dissolved against the wall of their fears. The tension between love and duty grew sharper with every passing day. Cassian began avoiding the dinner table conversations at home, preferring the honesty of Elowen's laughter over the icy commands of his parents. Elowen, on the other hand, carried guilt in her heart, torn between her loyalty to her family and the burning truth of her feelings for Cassian. She questioned herself at night. Was she being foolish, believing that love could cross such impossible boundaries? Yet every time she met Cassian's eyes, every time his hand brushed hers, her doubts fell silent. But the world around them did not stay silent. Invitations to grand parties began arriving at the D'Arcy mansion, each introducing Cassian to a suitable young woman from a wealthy family. His parents paraded these women before him like prized possessions, waiting for him to choose. Cassian, however, rejected them all, his mind and heart anchored to Elowen. This defiance only deepened the storm at home, turning arguments into battles that echoed through the marble halls. The conflict also reached the university. Friends of Cassian, those who had once admired his wealth, began to question his choices. Some mocked Elowen behind her back, calling her the charity girl, while others warned Cassian that he was risking everything. But instead of pulling them apart, these pressures strangely bound them closer. For in every cruel word, in every act of resistance, they found more reason to hold on, to fight, to believe in each other. Yet beneath their stubborn courage lay the undeniable truth. They were standing at the edge of a storm that could break them. Love had made them fearless, but the world was vast and merciless. And though they did not yet know it, this was only the beginning of the trials that would test not just their love, but their very souls. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a dangerous clarity. Cassian and Elowen realized that the world would never willingly grant them space to love. If they wanted their bond to survive, they would have to claim it for themselves, against all odds. That realization drew them closer than ever before, turning stolen glances into whispered vows into dangerous promises. They began meeting in places where no one from Cassian's gilded world would dare to wander. Narrow cafes tucked away on side streets, forgotten parks where wildflowers grew through cracked stone, the dim glow of the riverside where the Thames whispered secrets to the night. In those stolen hours, they built a world of their own, a fragile kingdom guarded not by walls but by words. Cassian would tell her, in a voice raw with longing, "Elowen, you are the only part of my life that feels real." And she, trembling yet steady, would reply, "Then hold on to me, no matter how hard the world tries to pull us apart." It was during one of those evenings by the river that Cassian first spoke of marriage. Not the grand ceremony his parents would demand, but something simple, something theirs alone. "We don't need their approval," he insisted, his eyes alight with a fire Elowen had never seen before. "We don't need their wealth, their palaces, their endless rules. We only need each other." Elowen's heart soared at his words, yet fear tugged at her. She knew what such defiance would cost. Her father's warnings rang in her ears, her mother's worried eyes haunted her. But when Cassian took her hand, the weight of the world seemed suddenly lighter. As though love itself was enough to defy gravity. For Elowen, the decision was not simple. Each night she returned to her cramped room above the cafe where she worked, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, wondering if she was being reckless. Cassian's world was paved with gold, hers with struggle. Could she truly step into his life without losing herself? Would she one day become the very thing his family accused her of being, a girl who reached too high, who was never enough? Yet every doubt dissolved when she remembered the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with reverence, as though she were the rarest treasure he had ever found. Cassian, for his part, grew more rebellious with every passing day. He stopped attending the grand parties, stopped entertaining the business proposals his father pushed onto him. Instead, he poured his time into Elowen, walking her home after long shifts, sitting with her in the library until midnight, writing her letters filled with confessions he could never speak at home. He was willing to abandon everything, inheritance, family name, fortune, for her. For the first time in his life, he felt alive, and he refused to let go. When summer arrived, their love was no longer a quiet flame but a wildfire. They dreamed of escape, of running away from the city, of finding a small place where no one knew the name D'Arcy or judged the name Hartfield. In whispered plans, they spoke of cottages by the sea, of gardens they would plant together, of children who would grow up in a home filled with love, not expectation. These dreams stitched their hearts closer, each promise a thread that made them believe they could truly weave a future beyond the reach of wealth and poverty. But love, when it challenges the world, demands a price. With every step toward each other, the resistance around them grew fiercer. Cassian's father threatened to cut him off, to disown him if he continued this madness. Elowen's parents, heartbroken, begged her to reconsider, fearing she would only be shattered. And the whispers at the university turned into open scorn, as though their love had become a scandal too dangerous to ignore. Yet through it all, Cassian and Elowen stood hand in hand, defiant against a universe that seemed determined to tear them apart. And so, under a canopy of stars on a quiet summer night, they made a vow, unofficial, unseen, yet binding as any marriage. They promised that no matter what storms came, no matter how heavy the chains of family or fortune, they would not abandon each other. Cassian swore that even if stripped of his name and wealth, he would choose Elowen again and again. Elowen swore that even if the world cast her aside, she would walk beside him until her last breath. In that moment, their love ceased to be a fragile dream, it became a rebellion, a fire lit against the coldness of the world. Yet in the silence that followed their vows, neither of them could ignore the shadow creeping closer. For vows made in defiance of fate are the ones destiny most often tests. And the storm that had been gathering at the edges of their love was ready to break. The wedding was nothing like the glittering spectacle Cassian's parents had imagined for their heir.
Der were no chandeliers, no orchestra, no diamonds sparkling under chandelier of gold.
Instead, there was a modest chapel on the edge of the city, the faint smell of lilies in the air, and two trembling hands clasped together as vows were whispered through tears. Only a handful of witnesses stood by, Elowen's parents, subdued but resigned, and a friend or two who dared to defy the D'Arcy glare. For Cassian, the absence of his family was a wound that burned. But when he looked at Elowen in her simple dress, radiant with quiet strength, he felt richer than any fortune his name could ever give him.
In the beginning, marier life was a fragile paradise.
They rented a small apartment in a neighborhood far from the mansions of Kensington and the crumbling factories of Manchester. It was their sanctuary, a space they filled with laughter, second-hand furniture, and late-night whispers. They cooked simple meals together, argued playfully about the state of the dishes, and fell asleep tangled in each other's arms. For the first time, Cassian felt he belonged to something pure, untainted by ambition. For Elowen, every morning she woke beside him was proof that dreams, however impossible, could come true. But reality, like an uninvited guest, soon crept into their little home. Cassian had kept his word. He walked away from his family's empire, refusing the inheritance and the path paved for him. That decision, however, came at a cost. Jobs did not come easily to a man with a reputation as a spoiled heir. Employers doubted his seriousness, whispering that he would never last. He tried, moving from one opportunity to another, internships, clerical work, even nights behind a bar, but each paycheck felt smaller, each rejection sharper. For a man who had once been surrounded by endless abundance, the weight of survival was crushing.
Elowen, tout, Carrier-Burdon.
She continued her studies while working shifts at the cafe, often returning home with aching feet and a tired smile. At first, she reassured Cassian, insisting they would manage, that love was enough to fill the cracks left by hardship. But as weeks turned into months, fatigue began to carve its way into their marriage. Bills piled on the table. Arguments over money became more frequent. Cassian grew restless, haunted by the echo of his father's voice, "You will never survive without us." Elowen, though patient, felt the sting of his frustration, sometimes wondering if she had dragged him into a life too heavy for him to bear. The cracks widened slowly, like fractures in glass. Cassian began to withdraw, ashamed of his failures, afraid to let her see the bitterness festering inside him. Elowen tried to reach him, tried to remind him of the vows they had made, but she too felt exhaustion pressing on her chest. Nights that once rang with laughter grew quiet, meals that once overflowed with conversation now ended in silence. They still loved each other fiercely, but love, under the strain of poverty and pressure, became a battlefield. And yet, amidst the struggles, there were moments that glowed like embers refusing to die. A shared kiss after a long day. A letter Cassian wrote, apologizing for his anger, promising to fight harder. A song Elowen hummed while cooking, making him remember the first time he heard her laugh. These moments reminded them that beneath the cracks, the foundation still held strong. But they both sensed it. Life was no longer simply about choosing love. Now it was about surviving it. The world outside offered little mercy. Cassian's former friends had vanished, unwilling to stand beside a man who had fallen from the heights of wealth. His parents did not call, did not visit, as though he had ceased to exist. Elowen's family, though kinder, often worried aloud, asking her if she had made the right choice. These voices, though spoken with care, deepened the wounds inside her. Still, she clung to Cassian, believing that storms were temporary, that together they could endure anything. The world collapsed around her. Grief was not loud but suffocating, pressing into her bones until even breathing felt impossible. She buried him with trembling hands, laying a single wildflower, a daisy his favorite, upon his grave. There was no grand funeral, no marble tomb, no chorus of mourners. Just her broken, whispering promises into the earth, "I will carry you in every heartbeat, in every dream, in every silence." Elowen's life after Cassian became a quiet tragedy. She continued her studies, built a life from the ashes of sorrow, and survived with a resilience she did not know she had. Yet in every smile there was a shadow, in every night a whisper of his laughter. She lived, but never stopped loving. Her story became one of endurance, a tale not of wealth or poverty, but of a love that defied the world yet could not escape its cruelty. Years later, people who knew them still spoke in hushed voices about Cassian D'Arcy and Elowen Price. They called it a forbidden romance, a love doomed by class, by pride, by the relentless weight of reality. But Elowen, when asked, would only smile faintly and say, "He was not my tragedy. He was my miracle, even if only for a moment."